Hello, that was my cut in my throat. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 93 of the Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Guard me. Wow.
Freudian slip there, huh?
My brain is just not on fire today. My name is Jack Gardner, and with me this week is my wonderful co-host, Naomi Lugo.
What did I say last time? It was like, howdy, y'all? No.
Good top of the morning.
Top of the morning to y'all.
To y'all, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing you say every week.
I say that every single week.
Yep.
Yeah.
Every single one. Yeah, how are you doing this week?
Living the dream. Right now I'm looking at my my Jigglypuff plushie. He's going to be our special guest for the week, so yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it have a name?
Jigglypuff.
Oh, it's okay.
We go canon here with our plushies.
It's okay. So, and I'm doing fine as well. But this week we are going to be talking. Well, you know what? I know I'm being really scatterbrained this week. I apologize. But one of the things that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and I like to periodically try and work this back into the show, and then I forget, and then the cycle repeats itself endlessly. But here on the Best Games Period, we like to talk about games we think may or may not be one of the best games of all time, the kinds of games that may or may not belong in video game canon. Every week we nominate one game to talk about, and then we kind of make our case for it. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, and sometimes we are neutral on on a given topic. And so this week we're talking about Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch.
Yeah.
You know what, though? You didn't specify which Ni no Kuni we were going to talk about this week.
Yeah, so it's going to be Wrath of the White Witch.
Okay, good, because I didn't know until, as I was preparing for the podcast today, that there were actually 3 other Ni no Kuni games besides Ni no Kuni 2. So Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch is actually the second Ni no Kuni game.
Kind of. So it's
sort of.
It's kind of a remake. So the first game released in 2010 or 2011, and that was on the DS. And so it generally has the same story, but obviously different graphics. So they kind of updated the graphics and gameplay and added on an additional ending to the PS3 version.
Right. And the PS3 version came out in 2011. The DS version came out in 2010, but the DS version only released in Japan. So I guess we kind of get a pass for not knowing that right off the bat.
Yeah, I'm not cool enough to have a Japan exclusive release. You know, I'm not quite that hipster yet.
Although I do have to say I preferred the name of Oliver's main town in the Japanese version, which was Hatroit. As opposed to Motorville.
Yeah, I mean, they're both kind of on the nose, but
right,
one flows off better.
I just liked Hatroit. So you nominated the game this week, and it's a game I've actually always really wanted to play, and so I was grateful for an excuse to dive into my backlog and kind of finally get some of that Studio Ghibli magic all over my PlayStation 3, my dusty PlayStation 3. Yeah, so why did you nominate it?
Well, I mean, it's like you said, the Studio Ghibli magicness, and it's a JRPG, like that's... And there's Pokemon elements. Come on. This game slays me dead. So, I mean, the game is a beautiful masterpiece, in my opinion. It plays like a Ghibli film would, and the story is... I mean, it's a little pedestrian at times, but at the same time, it has that magic to it that... They develop the characters so well that you just fall in love with everyone, and they do the cliches right. Like, of course, you're a hero who's trying to save a magical world, but they do it in a way that is absolutely enchanting.
Okay, yeah, and I can totally see that. And for people who don't know, this game was developed by Level 5, and if you don't know who Level 5 is, they are one of the most interesting developers in Japan, just because they tackle such a wide variety of games and subject matter, and they're mostly known for their RPGs, but they also do a whole bunch of other just random crazy stuff. Like they released a series for a while that was like a host a girl dating sim RPG for the 3DS. Like they do all these weird things, but then they also do their very first game was Dark Cloud, and a really well regarded RPG, and they've done I think a Breath of Fire game, or not Breath of Fire, I want to say Monster Hunter. That's not right either.
It is definitely not Monster Hunter.
the one with the slimes. What's the one with the blue slime? With the stupid face. You know what I'm talking about. Dragon Quest. They did a Dragon Quest game. I got it.
Yes, the one with the blue slimes. And they also did the Professor Layton series.
Yeah, which is highly well received.
And it's a little bit more similar to Ni no Kuni than the other game, since it kind of has the anime-esque style. So, as a background on Ni no Kuni itself, it's, like we said, made by Level 5 in partnership with Studio Ghibli. So they actually partnered with them to do the artwork. So throughout the game, the graphics are pretty much like you're in a Ghibli film. At times, it almost looks better than the cutscenes, at least in my opinion. And it's very fluid and very, very beautiful. So your protagonist is a kid named Oliver. And I looked up how old he is, and he's supposed to be 13, but I call BS on that. Throughout the game...
He's like 10.
Yeah, like at the most 10. I was thinking he was more like 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I guess you can interpret it however you want. But he's the protagonist. And I guess, do we want to go into spoilers on this one? It's kind of...
I mean, we're always going to be kind of going into spoilers. So, spoiler warning. I think maybe we'll try and avoid the major spoilers.
All right.
Like the biggest ones. But obviously, in any comprehensive talk about any game, or as comprehensive as we can get in an hour, there are going to be spoilers. So, you've been warned. And if you want to listen to this discussion and go into... And you haven't played Ni no Kuni, and you still want to go into Ni no Kuni blind, you should probably do that instead of listening to our podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so
but then listen to the podcast.
Then come back.
Yeah.
So you play as Oliver.
Devote yourself to this 200-hour RPG, and then come back and listen to our podcast.
It's only like 60 hours. So you play as Oliver, and the catalyst is Oliver's mother actually dies trying to save Oliver, but there's some magical foul play here. So
I think we need to even back up one step further, because Oliver lives in our world. Like he's in a mundane kind of
every town USA.
Yeah, like 1940s era town. There's no magic. Like he's unaware of a magical world.
Yet.
And then his mother dies, saving him from a river, and he feels awful about it.
Yes, he feels so awful that he's crying onto this homemade, I guess, teddy bear that his mother made him, and his tears awaken Mr. Drippy. And Mr. Drippy is actually a fairy from a magical land, and Mr. Drippy is in need of Oliver's help. And it turns out that Oliver is actually the key to saving this other world. So at first he's a little reluctant. He's like, no, my mom just died. I want to deal with this. But Mr. Drippy kind of convinces him. Because
he's like a fast-talking Scottish brogue.
From what I've heard, it's a Welsh accent. And it's fantastic. Okay. So... one of the mechanics in the game is that these two worlds are parallel, and there are soulmates that look like each other in each world, and we can explain that a little bit more later. But so there's hope that Oliver's mother's soulmate is in this other world, and if you save Oliver's mother's soulmate, you can save Oliver's mother. So of course he jumps at that opportunity. So then they travel to this magical world, and it is beautiful Studio Ghibli art style. So then you go on these quests to save the world with magic.
Yeah. One thing I was unclear about, to clarify everyone in the audience, I wasn't able to play through the entire game. I played through about 20 hours of it, trying to do side quests and all that jazz. So I got a pretty good gist of the gameplay, but not the overall story. And I was wondering, and I can cut this out if you think it's too big of a spoiler, but is this adventure real? Is this one of those things where, like, it's his grieving process, and at the end of the game... I guess I was unsure because a lot of the people in the real world can't see magic, or,
Yeah.
you know, they aren't, like, really batting any eyes when Oliver walks in and he's wearing, like, a cape and, like, fantasy garb and has a wand and a magic book.
You can definitely make the debate, I'm sure, that this is a kid grieving who's playing pretend and all that, but in the story itself, it's not like that.
Okay, so the end isn't like, it was all a dream.
No.
Your mother's still dead. Good luck, kid.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good. That was my main question about the story. But yeah, like you've been saying, it's a very beautiful game. Like, it's very lovingly crafted and rendered, and a lot of the visuals are really striking. I especially like how the Studio Ghibli-ness of it comes across very, very well. Like, you can recognize the signature style pretty much everywhere, and especially in the animated cutscenes. One thing I will nitpick a little bit is that sometimes the environments around Oliver, and especially in, like, the more dungeon-esque environments, can be kind of bland. And I feel like maybe that's because it was that work was too much for the Ghibli team.
So you're talking like when you're in battle systems and everything?
Well, like when you're in battles or when you're, like, running around inside of a dungeon. But, like, when you're running around, like, a town or something that's supposed to be kind of a main location that you're going to be going back to often, there's a lot more time and effort put into making those places feel alive and vibrant and beautiful.
Yes. And you didn't make it to Fairy Town, and oh my god, that was my favorite. It is so cute. So you can see it actually in the demo screen if you just let that demo reel run. It's the one where you see, like, an octopus and a pufferfish, like, in the town, and and then there's these fairies all talking with Welsh accents, walking around, saying tidy. That was
that it is one thing that really stood out to me. There's a lot of lingo being thrown around in Ni no Kuni, like tidy or neato or like, just a lot of strange phrases that I can see, like, if I'd played this as a kid, I would be using to the point of insufferability. Like, I don't know. It just feels like something I would do. Yes.
I mean, if this game had come out when I was a kid, like around maybe Legend of Zelda, or not Legend of Ocarina of Time, it would have been my favorite game of all time, I think.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. It just has that same kind of feel to it, that nostalgic feel, but with it still being fresh, I guess.
Yeah. So that was another thing I was wondering. Do you think that, I guess, I know that this game is oriented towards children, but I'm wondering if the audience it found was more like young adults / adults? Just because I don't know how popular this series actually became with kids.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another thing too. This game isn't really all that mainstream in general. I mean, there's kind of a resurgence with the release of Ni no Kuni 2, but before that, the talk about it was kind of sparse. There was, of course, reviews that came out around the time, but I mean, other than that, there's not really a lot of other hype around it, and I was kind of wondering why that seemed to be the case, or I could just be wrong in my perception of that, but I don't think this game is at the forefront of a lot of gamers' minds like it should be. Like, I think it is a classic, but a lot of people, like you, say that they have been meaning to play it, but they haven't necessarily played it.
And it's not like this series didn't do well. Like, it's shipped, I believe, like over 1 million units, almost 2 million.
Yeah, it did well in the practical sense. It's just, I don't think it's a part of gaming culture like it should be, I guess.
Well, yeah, it didn't take off like a Pokemon title, like among kids, I guess. And that's a little odd. And I think what actually ended up happening was Level 5 repurposed a lot of the ideas that kind of make up the backbone of Ni no Kuni's gameplay and turned those into Yokai Watch, which I feel is kind of more relevant to kids. Like that found a more of a kid-wide fan base. Whereas Ni no Kuni was received as an art house game because of the Ghibli name attached to it.
I mean, but at the same time, that's a winning combo, you know, where you have Ghibli in your game. I mean, Ghibli's, it's I guess, mainstream, you know, there's a lot of people who've seen those movies, but I mean, I could just be a nerd who's obsessed with Ghibli and just kind of underestimating its popularity. But it seems like something that should be a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, I think it might be that for people who are fans and who know Studio Ghibli, we tend to really overestimate how wide the appeal of Ghibli films are. Like, Princess Mononoke, fantastic film, one of my favorite films of all time, or Spirited Away, Kiki's Delivery Service. Those are films geared towards children, and it doesn't have the same recognition as Disney, where like everyone who has kids on the planet will take them to see a Disney movie.
Yeah.
And that will propel Frozen to being like #1 at the box office forever. Ghibli is more of like a niche thing for parents who are kind of in the know, if that makes sense.
The cool parents.
I mean, I'm not gonna phrase it that way. I'm not gonna fault anyone for not knowing what Studio Ghibli is, but I think it takes someone to kind of go outside of their wheelhouse in a way that it's asking an American audience to go outside more of their comfort zone than, say, like a Pokemon game, which has already kind of broken through and has widespread name recognition and
where like, Pikachu is recognized more than Mickey Mouse and any other mascot in the entire world at this point.
True?
From a statistic I saw, yes.
Whoa. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and so this game just hits my check marks so succinctly that that's probably what's making me kind of pause at its lack of recognition, I guess. Because, and we'll go more into gameplay, but it does have those Pokemon elements in it, and then this amazing art style. It's fantastic to me. So speaking of gameplay, it is a RPG and not necessarily turn-based. It's kind of hard to describe the style.
Timer-based.
Yeah. So you have eventually 3 people in your team. And each of them gets what are called familiars. And the familiars are those Pokemon-esque monsters. So at the start, Oliver has 1 familiar, and then as, you know, RPGs kind of go, he accumulates more friends, and they accumulate more familiars. So as you encounter these familiars in the world, you can catch them, and you can train them, and you can evolve them. A lot like Pokemon, and they're adorable, and they all have adorable names. And then they have their different elements, which is more, it's like sun, moon, star, and planet, which is, I mean, it's kind of, you can kind of figure it out once you get there. But, so you battle with your familiars, but you still take the damage as your person. So Oliver will send out his familiar in a battle, and he'll still take damage as 1 unit. And same with all of your other party members. So as you're battling, you can roam around, so it's not turn-based in that sense, and attack either groups of enemies or single enemies with bosses. And you have magical attacks, or it depends on the type of familiar you have. You have more tank styles, you have fighters, you have casters, you have healers. And so the combat has it's kind of come under fire from past reviewers, and I'm curious how you feel about the combat and what difficulty you played at, Jack.
I played it on the easiest, just because I knew from things that people had told me in the past that it can be a very difficult game. And even on the easiest setting, this game's hard.
It is super difficult. Like, I started playing it on normal, is because, you know, I mean, there's 2 settings. It's easy and normal. It's like, okay, I'll take normal, because usually or easy is like easy. But in this game, easy is not easy. Easy is still normal, at times very hard, very difficult. So, I mean, it didn't put me off too much. I mean, there were certain battles that definitely got me frustrated just because of unfair timing and all of that. But I still enjoyed the challenge of it.
And I think for me, the gameplay might be one of the weaker aspects of Ni no Kuni. I love the Pokemon style combat, but I wish I had a little bit more control over the things that were happening. When I go into a menu, like having the stress of like trying to decide what you want to do while you're trying to avoid attacks and trying to pay attention to what's going on in the background, and also trying to go through the menu system at the same time
Yes.
was just it made me irritated, like viscerally.
Yeah. And like you have a defend mechanic. Eventually you unlock the ability to have your entire party defend or attack, which is pretty late in the game, actually, so it makes it kind of frustrating for a while. But you have to manually go in a menu while real time to defend yourself if there's a big attack coming. And before you get that all-party defend mechanism, you had to go in and make everyone defend or just take damage. So that was extremely frustrating.
Well, and there's no way you can micromanage all three characters.
No. And there is a tactics menu, but it's pretty basic. It's like keep everyone healthy or attack with all you got, save mana, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's
not that great.
No. I mean, it's okay, and there's definitely strengths and weaknesses between each character, but I mean, I guess my love of the game either clouded it made me biased and I was okay with that and I kind of accepted it and really liked the challenge, or I don't know, I enjoyed it. Like I said, the only parts that really put me off were just kind of stupidly difficult bosses.
This game would have benefited, I think, from a gambit system like Final Fantasy XII has, where you can really go in and you can customize that AI quite a bit. I think I would have appreciated something like that in here.
Yeah.
Cast healing spells if, someone falls below 30% HP, or something that's more specific than hang back and cast it and support everyone.
Yeah, because even when I did set some of my party members to keep everyone healthy, I didn't notice them actually actively doing that when I needed it, or at least enough.
Also, I've noticed that there's like a really items are very expensive in this game.
Yeah.
And your characters can burn through mana, especially if they're like tactics aren't set on like conserve mana. They'll just cast spells left and right.
Yes.
And you'll just be out in the middle of nowhere and have no mana anymore. And you don't want to use your like 1 mana item because it costs like 500 gold and you only have 1,000.
Yes. So, I mean, it's kind of like Pokemon. Everything is super expensive in the beginning, but then eventually you're kind of rolling in cash and everything.
Yeah, but like eventually is like 40 hours into the game. Like,
yeah,
I'm 20 hours in and I just unlocked the ability to do a new thing, which I guess is kind of cool.
It seems very RPG to me. Like they just very slowly unroll characters, unroll mechanics. Like 20 hours into the game, you get your familiars, which is crazy looking back, because those are a key part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was very unhappy that the very first time I was forced to fight one of the familiars, because it's so cute. It's like a little Growlithe.
And then you get into the same same thing with Pokemon where you're battling adorable little monsters against each other. But at least you just take the damage. You're taking the damage for them, or you're feeling the pain with them, or however that works.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that they ever explain that. It's just like the mechanic.
Yeah.
It made sense at first when like the familiar was like part of your soul, but then they're just like later on they're just like, oh, you find these guys everywhere. It's fine. They're
just everywhere. And then there's a part, because you battle these familiars, right? Because they're attacking you. And there's a part where Mr. Drippy's like, you attack them, but we don't kill them. They just kind of go away for a while until they act better. I'm like, right.
Also, how come Mr. Drippy doesn't fight?
Eventually, he gets a mechanic that helps you out. It's called Tidy Tears, but it's
What a
very
piece of garbage.
yes, it's very random. And it's not very helpful. He'll basically heal everyone a certain amount and give them a guard, but it's random and not always when you need it. So it's not always like when everyone goes below a certain health. It's just random.
And speaking of random, there's also each familiar and each character has their own super attack that they can perform, but there's not like any way to really concretely get that super attack. You just have to randomly either knock you have to randomly knock a glowing yellow orb out of an enemy and then get that orb, and then you can perform your super attack.
Yeah, so the way that mechanic is tied in, so while you're in battle, the familiars and bosses you'll fight will cast magic attacks or special attacks at you, and if you can stop them, you'll get the thing will say nice, which is kind of weird in this game. It sounds like a racing game. And then, so if you do that enough, at least from what I read, the likelihood of those golden orbs dropping out of them and you being able to unlock that special attack is tied together. So if you're more accurate, you have more likely chance of finding those.
Yeah, but it's still like
really random.
Yeah, I don't know. I was irritated by that because I would go for like literal hours without seeing one.
Yes.
And I didn't feel like I was terrible at the game, but I mean, maybe I was terrible. I'm not sure.
And another thing is the familiar catch rate it's pretty frustrating, especially later on. It is extremely, or I feel like it's low. I think I read some of them go down to 3%, and when there's a bunch of side quests in the game, so they range from simple fetch quests to catching these familiars, and those were really annoying because you had to catch them without them going to the PC or the familiar retreat, and you had to catch specific ones and get them to this person. So I
just did one of those before we recorded.
You would just spend hours trying to get these stupid familiars,
and often they weren't even ones you wanted. Like I think the very first one that you have to do, or you're asked to do, is like get this one that looks like a bunch of bananas and yes. One that's like a little purple turban dude.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't want those. I want this cool skeleton guy.
Oh man. And then I guess we can talk about, since we've been griping a lot, let's give the game some praise with the familiar designs. I really dug them. They are definitely more adorable kind of style, and we keep on using the similarity to Pokemon, but they kind of have something a little bit more to them. I feel like Pokemon does a lot of, I mean, they also have almost 800 Pokemon, but they do a lot of kind of similarities to animals or random objects like chandeliers. Anyway, so there are some of those in this game, but they seem to have more whimsy to them. Like, there is a bunch of bananas, right? But at the same time, I feel like they did a pretty good job designing that bunch of bananas. I don't know.
Yeah, well, off the cuff, off the top of your head, do you know how many of these familiars are in the game?
I don't.
Is it like 100 or so?
I don't.
Okay.
It's a pretty manageable amount. I think in order to platinum, I think you have to get all of them.
Did you platinum this game?
No, I did not. Okay. Platinum. There's still a bunch of content that I need to play, which is also what makes this game amazing. So I briefly talked about how there are side activities. So there's another mechanic in the game, which is, oh man, and I'm blanking on what it's called, but it's you do good deeds and that unlocks like kind of like these scratch ticket things.
Oh, yeah.
And then once you fill up one of those or a couple of those, you unlock different things that help you out in the game. So this is kind of your RPG way to level up Oliver's abilities. So it's things like extra XP, dropping extra orbs, which help you with your health and your mana, that kind of thing. So I think that adds a lot of depth to the game. And usually with these kind of fetch quests and stuff, they're always just kind of annoying. But I found that these added a lot to the game generally. There's a couple where you follow them throughout the game and you get this nice little resolution at the end if you completed them, you know?
Yeah. And I generally liked it, but it did make me wonder like how that works in game, because like the number of stamps you get sometimes feels just very arbitrary. Like,
yes,
oh, I just healed your soul. I got two stamps.
And it gets even more arbitrary towards the end, because at the end he'll give you like 6 for go get me some spring water. Here's 6 stamps. Just because it gets harder, you know, as you go on. You need 3 cards versus 1 to get abilities.
Yeah. Or like the world hasn't seen a magician in like, I don't know, there was only like 4 of them previously, and like you meet this girl and she's like, I want you to do some magic for me. I'll give you 2 stamps. It's like, okay, I guess that's what my abilities are worth. But
yeah,
that's not really like a gripe or anything. But going back to the familiars for a second.
Yeah.
For me, I think the pleasingness of the designs kind of varied from like fairy to fairy or familiar to familiar. Like some of them I was like, man, this is really cool, really cute. I really dug. It took a while for the first familiar you get to grow on me.
Yeah, mighty.
Yeah. But like there are some that are just adorable. Like later on you run into a little cat thief character that has like a little shiv and
it runs like a ninja.
And I think it's called like
Purloin.
Purloin
or something.
And that's just so, and like a lot of them have just the punniest names. And and it's either wonderful or painful. But my favorite part is when you're able to catch them and then they have a second pun name. Like Purloiner becomes Percy.
And you can switch out through those names. It's great. Yeah, so I looked it up and there are about under 400, so like 350 familiars, but there's different familiar families. So like Purloiner evolves into, so the way the evolution branches, so you get your first, that's like the Purloiner, and then you get your second evolution, and that's kind of standard for each familiar, but then it branches off and you get to choose between 2 different ones, so that evolved Purloiner could turn into 2 different types, which is pretty cool. So that's why there's kind of a lot of them. So there's a lot in each family.
So I never saw like the final evolution of any of these
they're badass.
familiars, but the one thing I was gonna bring up was the fact that the secondary evolution seemed like almost identical to the first version of most of the monsters I came across.
Yeah, like you'll get a slight color change and all of that.
Or like the skeleton has X's for eyes in its first stage, and then it has open angry eyes for its second stage.
Yeah, and that varied from familiar to familiar. But some of the end stages were kind of lame, but a lot of them were pretty cool. Like as you're battling through the final area, and I won't spoil anything, you get to battle a lot of these final evolutions of these guys, and they are just bad. Like I wanted to catch so many of them, but those were the 3% capture rates.
So it depends. Like for example, there's one you run into that's basically a red demon baby that's wearing diapers and has a little fire on its head, and that one just looks dumb.
It does.
Like there are a whole bunch of them that like are kind of forgettable and lame to me, but the ones that really stand out are super cute and adorable, and you want to catch them. Yeah. But I'm not sure if that's a knock against the design or if that is intended by the design, like having those really good ones stand out by having like a sea of mediocrity around them.
Well, and what's really weird is, so each person in your party has different genuses that they're more compatible with, and so say Oliver has 3 different genuses that he's compatible with, and each of them kind of follow suit with that. So it's kind of dumb to choose any other familiar that isn't compatible just because you get a pretty good stat boost. Like, you pretty much optimize each familiar that you choose. So it limits the ones that you can use. And so you only get a certain amount of party members throughout the game, and it's very staggered. So you end up, I feel like a lot of them just kind of get wasted. Like, there's a really cool, like, cat healer that you get later on, and it evolves into an Astrolynx. But no one's compatible with the genus. So it's like, I ended up using it just because I was like, I want to use this guy. But, I mean, I should have used another familiar because I get that stat bonus. So it's like, I feel like that kind of, I understand what they were trying to do with it, but I felt like it was kind of to the detriment of being able to use this full range of familiars. Like, I ended up doing a lot of research on the different familiars that were compatible with each party member. And they were pretty much, I mean, there was some variation here and there, but there was a lot of unanimous choices. Like, later on, you get a manatee kind of one that is really compatible with Esther, and you're pretty much dumb not using it. And that bone one that you like, Jack, that one's with Swain. You pretty much have to use those since the game is so difficult. I mean, there's different types of players out there who like different types of challenges, but I feel like if you want to play the game like it's supposed to, you have to use those guys, which I thought was kind of a bummer. You know, I wanted to have more freedom in who I chose to be in my final parties.
Yeah, and I don't think they do a really good job conveying that you get, like for me, the general, like, the game just kind of communicated a general, you should probably use these 3 types, but beyond that, I was just kind of like, it's just generally better to use these 3 types, I guess. I don't know how much of a difference this actually makes. And for a game that is very simple, or seemingly simple on the mechanical end, like, for example, each familiar you get can only learn, like, a handful of different moves.
See that evolves with them.
Yeah, and that goes up over time, like, they get different ability slots and things. But you can dive pretty deep into the familiar system. Like, there's a surprising amount of depth there. And one thing we haven't even touched on is each familiar has its own preferences for, like, rewards, and you can give them, like, candy and cake
it's
and
cute.
Stuff.
They're all desserts.
It is really cute, and you can give them too much and they get too full.
And there's a familiarity system. Like, if you feed them a certain amount of times their favorite treat, you can max out that familiarity. And I didn't do that with any of them. I mean, it takes a lot. It would take dedication to do that. Like, I kept with Mighty, which is Oliver's first familiar, throughout the entire game, and I was still not able to max him out, even though I knew his favorites. So it definitely takes time and dedication to master the system, and each familiar has their own set of weapons and armor that you can choose. That was really RPG complicated. Like, everyone in your party and all their familiars needs equipment and weapons, and you have to constantly be cycling that out, and it's expensive. And yes,
I mean, I think, and this kind of circles back around to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. I think part of the problem for Ni no Kuni in terms of, like, finding its audience is that it has a couple things working against it. The name, for one, it's just kind of weird and has so many syllables to work around, as opposed to, like, Pokemon. You can say that. Pokemon, three very distinct syllables, as opposed to Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch.
Yeah.
And that by itself sounds pretty strange. But then I think a lot of the trailers focused a lot on the story element, which I can see 100% why they would do that. You have the pedigree of Studio Ghibli there, but there is, at its heart, the game, I feel like, would have been a huge hit on 3DS for kids if it had been marketed in a different way, if that makes sense.
Like Pokemon.
Well, like Pokemon, and that's kind of the comparison we keep turning to, because there is certainly that influence there, but it also plays very differently. It just kind of, it confuses me that there wasn't also a 3DS version or a DS version released here, in the States. Just because I feel like that would have helped them kind of break into that market a little bit more.
I feel like oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the PlayStation 3 was kind of more of a higher end tech device in 2011. Like, it was one of the most expensive consoles on the market, and on the other hand, you had a DS version sitting around for a year that you could have localized for an American audience or a Western audience, and I feel like it would have found a different home. Like, I can see, again, little kid me going nuts and like pouring 100, 200 hours into this game, capturing all of these familiars and maxing out their familiarity. And like, now adult me, ain't no one got time for that.
Yeah, and the game is playable on PS4, but since PS4 can't play PS3 games, you can only play it through PlayStation Now, which is another barrier for people.
Right. Well, and to be fair, if you have a good internet connection, PS Now is great for someone like me.
But if you don't, and it drops out, it can be super annoying, especially in a real-time RPG.
Right, exactly.
Not saying that from experience or anything. But, I mean, for all of these things, it still makes up for all of it because of the story. And I'm not even necessarily talking about the characters. I mean, there are some very, very strong characters that I did fall in love with. Like, Oliver is just the most adorable, pure-hearted little thing. And Mr. Drippy, I mean, his design isn't my favorite, but he is charming and he carries the story along. I mean...
Let's stop and talk about Mr. Drippy for a second. Because his design is the worst.
He has a septum piercing, and it's a giant lantern.
He's basically a teardrop with like a strange like onesie suit, and then he has a lantern note for a nose ring.
Yeah, and like I feel like they could have done more with marketing there. Like, if they had a cuter design for him, they probably could have done better. Because, like, the only merchandise, or I guess the only, like, kind of plushie merchandise you can get is, like, a plushie Mr. Drippy. And I do not want to cuddle that thing. No, it has a grown man voice.
Like, even if it more resembled the doll that Oliver had at the beginning, it would be a better design. Because that has more, like, color and more things going on.
And I mean, at the same time, like, once you get to the fairyland, you see more of fairies, and that's what Mr. Drippy is. He is a fairy, and all of the fairies come from one mother. And it works. It works once you know the game, but from an outsider perspective, Mr. Drippy is just bizarre.
I mean, part of it makes me wonder if, like... to a certain extent, it's like RPG Stockholm Syndrome. Like, you've just invested so much time into the game by that point that you're just kind of like, I mean, it's fine. Like, it's okay. Like,
now we need to start a
podcast
podcast called RPG Stockholm Syndrome. Where we just talk about the stuff that we put up with in RPGs because we love them and they take so much time from our lives. I mean, it's definitely true. I mean... there's certain Pokemon that I have a fondness for just because I grew up with them and played with them for a very long time, but they're still dumb. Like Slowpoke and you know.
I distinctly remember when I fell off of the Pokemon bandwagon, and it was when I saw some of the preview images for whichever Pokemon introduced the one with like the ice cream cone Pokemon.
I think that's Generation 6, if I'm not wrong.
Wait, whichever one that was, I saw that, I was just like, that is dumb, and I cannot get on board with it, and that's where it kind of lost me, and it makes me a little sad, and I'm sure I'll get back into Pokemon at some point, but...
yeah, I feel like that's a pretty common thing. But then there's so many other well, anyway, this is a different discussion.
Yes.
Okay, before we go on the Pokemon derailment, I guess let's go back to story. So Some of the characters are kind of weak. Like, I wish Esther was stronger because I want more female characters, of course. She kind of just comes off very flat. And then they do the same thing that a lot of RPGs do, and they make her kind of a weak healer compared to everyone else. Like, come on, there can be strong female characters that aren't just weak and only have healing. But they still work within the dynamic of the game. And what I read is that they really wanted to focus on character development and story development. And I think they did a fantastic job with that. Everything kind of gets tied at the end. Everything makes sense, which I feel like a lot of times RPGs, we fall into that Stockholm Syndrome thing again, where we're like, okay, sure, that magic crystal, yeah, that's the meaning of everything. This godlike, this guy with the god complex, yeah, he came from a mutated meteorite, sure, sounds good. But this game is more like a storybook kind of plotline. But they made it so endearing that that's okay, and it's not too shallow. And the characters definitely help. I found myself bonding a lot more with the villains, but they did that on purpose. And I mean, no spoilers, but it kind of ties into the ending and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see why someone would start playing this game and then put it down because of the story and how... like if you have played a significant number of RPGs, you will be very familiar with a lot of the story beats in Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. Like you go, like there's one of the very first things you do is you go into the sewers and you fight a giant rat boss, and one of the next things you do is you go to the equivalent of like the fire temple, and like it falls into a lot of these tropes, and it has a lot of these story beats, like, you know, oh, idyllic life, and all of a sudden something bad happens and you have to go on this magical journey. And like a lot of these things you have seen over and over and over again in RPGs. But the way that Ni no Kuni goes about it feels, it doesn't feel to me as tiresome as kind of like a more, what you might get from like a more
Final Fantasy.
Not even a Final Fantasy, but like there are a legion of Final Fantasy wannabes out there.
Yes.
And like JRPGs that just don't quite click, and they use a lot of the same tropes, and I've played a lot of them, and yeah, but you'll recognize a lot of these. And to me, Ni no Kuni is more like a warm, comfy blanket RPG,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
That's where they benefit so much from the Studio Ghibli collaboration. It feels like a Ghibli film. And a lot of Ghibli films still use these kind of typical story plot lines, but they do it in a different way. Like, I think Miyazaki, he, with his, quote, villains, doesn't seem to always make them black and white bad guy. There's always some sort of redeemable quality for these villains, and the pathway to their villainhood is what makes them so complex and interesting. So I think that's what Ni no Kuni benefits from in their storytelling, is that they're able to kind of go away from the typical video game-ness and go more into film, maybe.
There's that storybook sensibility to it that you were talking about. Like, there are problems, but they're problems that can be fixed by, teleporting back to his own world and like finding a stray cat, and that is the key to solving the problem. You have to go and make cheese out of milk to feed to an empress. And like it's these, I guess, they're what's the word I'm looking for?
Childlike.
No, that's not quite it. It's unconventional solutions to problems that you have seen come up time and time again in RPGs, and the way that it has, I guess, a childlike sensibility towards that problem solving.
Yeah, because this game is so damn pure-hearted. It really is. Like, there's so another key part of the game is the main villain. His name is Shadar, and he goes around stealing pieces of people's hearts. And so if there's anyone doing any sort of bad thing in the world, it's because their heart is broken. And like, just listen to how that sounds. That is so pure. Like, the reason why this couple is fighting on the road and she's having doubts about their business is because she's lacking confidence. And you have to go find some confidence from someone who is overflowing with confidence and give it to this person to make them feel better. Like,
and
come
that was actually
adorable.
my favorite part of Ni no Kuni. Like, that entire sensibility is entirely built around having empathy for people and understanding why they are the way they are. And like, sometimes the game fell into like, oh, it's a magical reason that they are sick, and you can certainly have that lens, but really on the whole, it's, oh, this guy is brokenhearted. Like, he's not. I don't know. Like, it was just it very much based in empathy and like trying to understand why people are acting the way they are. And unfortunately, in the real world, you can't fix people by just like borrowing courage from someone and giving it to someone else. But yeah, it was really nice, and I could see an entire game being built around just that concept by itself.
Yeah, it was adorable and sweet. I mean, because if you think of the world in a really simplistic way, like, the reason why people do bad things is because they are broken and brokenhearted. And I think it is an extremely childlike way to look at things, but I mean, that's the view you have from the protagonist. You're a 7 to 13-year-old boy who just lost their mother and trying to make the world better.
It is like the accurate way to look at the world, because like, people don't just do evil things because they're evil. And I think that the game itself that's kind of like the underlying message of Ni no Kuni. Like, they're doing it because there is some sort of pain from something else that is motivating them to do something that is hurting someone else, and it's just kind of this giant cycle that's ultimately very destructive. And it kind of takes empathy from other people to kind of help fix things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That sensibility is infused into all of Ni no Kuni, and that's why I kind of compared it to like a warm blanket or like a comforting hug. And that's kind of like how I felt playing this game. And yeah, there's a lot of frustrating moments, but there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah, there is. And speaking of good stuff, the music in this game is pretty phenomenal. So you have, like other RPGs, an open world system, and that open world map, the graphics on it are awesome too. I wish they carried it over into Ni no Kuni too, but we'll see.
Well, and speaking of the music, it's composed by Studio Ghibli's longtime composer.
Yes, and it's performed by the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra, I believe. And it just fills the room that you are playing in. Like, this is a pretty loud game, but it's amazing. The music, it just has such a good way of creating and completing the world, I guess. So each different region will have different types of music. And so initially you are walking around on foot, but then later on you'll get a boat. And then after that you'll get a dragon. So once you get the dragon and you're flying around and you'll hear this different type of music, it is just... I was nerding out and just riding on this dragon's back, listening to the music, going, wee! Because it was beautiful. Like, you could just see the world so much faster. So I just really liked the way they did that pacing, I guess, is that you can appreciate... It makes the world at first is huge when you're walking around, and it's you have to take time to walk, and then you get to expand on it once you get into the ocean and see how much bigger it is. But then you're kind of brought back to scale when you're on the dragon's back. And I really appreciated that.
The pacing definitely has its pros and cons. And the con is the beginning of the game, and learning how to play is an incredibly slow process. Like, painfully slow sometimes. Like, again, I'm 20 plus hours into this game, I just unlocked like the last thing on the main menu when you pause the game. Like that, it's a long process. But the pro for that is that getting to that higher level of, whether that is ability wise or familiar wise or, exploration wise with like the dragon, it makes that a lot more rewarding.
Yes.
You've had to work to get to that point.
Definitely.
One thing I do want to point out, and this is just like a small connection to another game that I brought up about like 50 to 60 episodes ago. I did an honorable mention for a game called Overblood, which if you are unfamiliar with Overblood, it's this really, really campy, very, very, very poorly aged survival horror game that was developed by a company called Riverhill Soft. And it received a sequel, which was actually, instead of a survival horror game, a weird RPG adventure game hybrid called Overblood 2, and it was a huge commercial flop. It also had a game-crippling glitch that caused about 75% of games to just not be completable.
Oof.
And that's how it shipped. I bring that up because the founder of Level 5 is a man named Akihiro Hino. He was the lead developer on Overblood 2. And they after that game, he and his development team kind of broke away from Riverhill Soft, which went under, I believe, and they decided that they were gonna make RPGs for Sony's new PlayStation 2 console, and they became Level 5, and they made Dark Cloud, which became a really successful RPG. And they've come a long way since making a terrible, terrible RPG.
We all start somewhere.
and now they're, working with Studio Ghibli. They have Professor Layton, Yokai Watch, all kinds of good things. And it's just really interesting to see how even that big of a commercial failure and like a horrible problem they had, like a game, they made 2 games that were so bad they are actually brilliant, and they've come around to making genuinely good games that are amazing.
Interesting.
Which ties into the whole pacing point, because it took them a long time to get to where they are now, and it's very gratifying. See, it
Sure,
made sense. It made
sure.
sense. So would you say this is one of the best games, period?
Absolutely. And that's because it was able to capture that childhood wonder that I had both watching Studio Ghibli films and playing older RPGs, which, I'm going to sound sappy here, was a feeling that I thought would be lost, that I wouldn't be able to redeem again in games, just because I feel like games are more, and this isn't for all games, but they're more about different things from what Ni no Kuni is core at its core. Like we talked about how it's about explaining why people are the way they are and how we can have empathy for them. I feel like that's something that not a lot of games do. They might touch on empathy, but it's not a main piece of their, their lore. It's a beautiful game. It's fun. The Pokemon-esque system is fun and in-depth, and overall it was very strong. So yeah, that's why I think it's one of the best games, period.
Okay. I'm gonna disagree with you slightly as far as it's a best game, period. I think it's a really, really great game. I think that there are a few things that for me hold it back from getting like the 100% endorsement. And I think that comes down to a lot of the combat itself. I find very, it's hard. It's really hard for me to get into it. And it's either I'm kind of coasting through it and just hitting the attack option over and over again, or I'm getting obliterated by a boss and feeling very frustrated as I'm trying to go through menus. And so that kind of threw me off a little bit. And then also just some of the design things I'm lukewarm, but like overall for me it was like a nice warm RPG hug that I very much enjoy, and I'm gonna finish playing through it all the way. But
I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, and I just, for me, from everything I've experienced so far, it would be like a B plus A minus, somewhere in there. And that, to me, it's not quite up to like an A plus, or an A.
Okay.
So it's like it's one of those things where it's like it's hard for me to like draw the line between what I think is a great game and what I think is belongs in the canon of video games. And I think there are just some things about this that make it a little bit too specifically geared to me or to certain people that doesn't, I don't know. It's I need to draw the line somewhere, and I don't think it quite crosses over into best games period territory for me.
Well, I strongly disagree, but that's where we have discussions, and that's where we go stronger, right?
Yep, and that's also where everyone who's listening can chime in over on @bestgamesperiod on Twitter. We run weekly polls, and do you happen to have the poll for Frog Fractions up?
I do. I have it open right now. So last week we talked about Frog Fractions. Jack made the case that it's one of the best games, period, and Marcus Stewart and I we lukewarm agreed, just because of what the game was able to do for gaming in general. So 33% of you thought yes, that this is one of the best games, period. 22% said no, and 45% of you, the majority, said there are bugs everywhere. So 33% over 22% say that yes, Frog Fractions is one of the best games, period.
And I feel like the bugs option is also a yes, just a sassy yes.
And sassy yes is very strong, so.
Well, I'm glad that Frog Fractions has made it into the canon of best video games, period.
And we'll put Ni no Kuni up on there so you guys can back me up here and help get Ni no Kuni on that canon too. Wink, 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 hint, hint, hint.
And in a similar vein, we talked about another RPG last week. We actually were busy beavers. We put two episodes up last week. And I did a little Facebook poll about whether or not Revengeance Star could be considered one of the best games, period. And overwhelmingly, people voted no. However, there were a couple people who voted yes. So, there are at least it's a niche game, and we kind of knew that going into the episode. So
yeah, and it's a game that doesn't have a lot of exposure, so we get it.
Right. That being said, is there any final words you want to say about Ni no Kuni?
It is gorgeous, and I want them to make more plushies so I can collect even more plushies and add to my obscene collection. Fair.
And with that we want to hear more from you. So hit us up on Twitter, participate in our polls, all that good stuff. And we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod, where you can throw us $1 per month, and we sometimes come out with fun little episodes for people who back us, and they're specifically on Patreon. And then you can also find us you can download the episodes off of Apple Podcasts, the Google, whatever, iHeartRadio, Libsyn, SoundCloud. We're on like pretty much any place you can find a podcast, really. So look for us there, leave us reviews, give us likes, all that good stuff, share on social media, whatever. And with that being said, you can also find us on Game Informer and Extra Life. And if you haven't heard of Extra Life before, it's an awesome charity where people play games and raise money for sick and injured kids across the United States and Canada. And One of the cool things is when you go to sign up at extra-life.org, you can actually choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want to support, and 100% of everything you raise goes directly to that hospital to help sick and injured kids, so it's pretty great. If you want to get more involved in the community side of things, you can go to community.extra-life.org, where you will find this very podcast along with a bunch of articles about games, and you can connect with various people in your geographical area to, play some games with some new cool people, or, coordinate for local events for the children's hospital, all that good stuff. So check that out over at community.extra-life.org. And Naomi, anything you want to plug?
No, just let us know which games you want us to talk about and support us on Patreon.
Help us keep them lights on. And with that, we'll be seeing you on the flippity dippity.